Hello, kiddies. Today's Mafia story you are about to hear is full of death, sadistic torture, and the failure of the New York police to catch said killer. Viewer and listening discretion is advised. This story gets deep and gruesome as I tell the story of a mob serial killer and his very sadistic crew. Born on September 7th, 1940, in Brooklyn, New York. His parents were typical working class parents. Having 4 brothers and sisters, his teenage years saw Roy Albert DeMeo train as a butcher at a local grocery store, skills he will bring to sadistic effect later in life. Unfortunately, his brother died in Korea in 1951. His father then died from a heart attack in 1960. These tragedies pushed Roy's mom to return to Italy with her youngest son to live near relatives. After graduating high school in 1959, Roy began loan sharking, eventually becoming an associate of the Lucchese crime family, who controlled all things junkyard and towing in the Flatlands and Canarsie areas of New York. By 1966, a soldier in the Gambino crime family, Anthony Nino Gaggi, met DeMeo and offered him even more money if he joined the Gambino crew. So the late 60s saw DeMeo's prospects increasing due to his earnings as a loan shark, and then the formation of the DeMeo crew, who ran a car theft ring. 16-year-old Harvey Chris Rosenberg became the first to join the crew, bringing many friends to DeMeo, whose names were Joseph Testa, Anthony Center, Richard and Frederick Denome, Henry Borelli, his cousin Joseph Dracula Guglielmo, and later Vito Arena and Carlos Profeta. In 1972, Roy DeMeo somehow found his way into joining a credit union, utilizing said credit union to launder much of his money. He also stole funds from the credit union to supplement his loan sharking business. When DeMeo's neighbors became suspicious, he said he worked in construction, food retailing, and the used car business. In 1975, law enforcement found the body of Andre Katz, a known car thief who had quite a fortunate time stealing cars, but at this time, his body had been chopped up and stored in garbage bags. The gruesome discovery was to be the start of a relentless killing spree by Roy DeMeo and his Gemini crew. It said DeMeo was responsible for over 200 murders and hits. Andre Katz was one of the first due to an argument between him and the DeMeo crew. And Katz eventually started singing on the DeMeo crew to the Brooklyn DA's office, providing incriminating information on Rosenberg particularly. DeMeo caught wind of this and had Borelli contact Babette Kestel about being bait to lure Katz into a bad predicament. Later, Katz stood before a grand jury spilling the beans on all he knew of the DeMeo crew. But in 1975, Kestel lured Katz to her apartment, where DeMeo and his crew abducted him, took him to a grocery shop nearby, where Katz was stabbed multiple times, then dissected with different parts sealed in several garbage bags. Law enforcement had to use dental records to verify who the body was they had found. The 1970s saw the DeMeo crew perfect their grisly habit of dismembering and disposing of the bodies never to be found. This method eventually became known as the Gemini method, and it was a very effective, sadistic, and gruesome, but, like I said, effective way to dispose of bodies, and it was named for the bar that they used as a base, the Gemini Lounge. The Gemini method was performed as follows. The victim was to be lured into the Gemini lounge via a side door, where DeMeo creeped upon said victim, shooting them in the head with a silenced pistol, wrapping their head with a towel. Then victim was stabbed in the heart to prevent more blood flow. Then said victim would be stripped of their clothing, hung in a bathtub, cut from chin to privates to be bled out. Then the body was gruesomely dissected with no blood splattering due to bleeding the victim out first. The parts were then put into different garbage bags and or boxes and sent to the Fountain Avenue landfill so the bodies could disappear under all that waste. Law enforcement tried to find evidence of a body but were not successful at all. It closed in 1985 and is now a beautiful park. The DeMeo crew, though, were not hamstringed to only one way of killing. They had no hesitation filling a contract performing old-fashioned murder. DeMeo's sadistic mind was also on other business practices, such as the porn industry with peep shows and prostitution rings, with his most sadistic piece being child porn and bestiality. Gaggy looked the other way as long as these things kept lining his pockets with profits. Although DeMeo was already pushing his luck, he was still involved in the trade of narcotics, which was a very taboo thing in the Gambino family. The head of the Gambino family at the time, Paul Castellano, Paulie, was very against narcotics and porn. He thought they were bad for business, bad for the family. In 1970, the IRS began investigating into DeMeo's earnings, though DeMeo slipped past the IRS when associates claimed DeMeo worked for them, covering most of his tax claims. DeMeo's earnings and his crew continued to grow. 1976 saw his loan sharking booming, and then an automobile firm contacted him, Team Auto Wholesalers, and they were added to his long list of customers. They even bought stolen cars from DeMeo, turning even more profits. Add in the multiple hijackings at JFK Airport of delivery trucks, and DeMeo was turning a huge profit for Nino Gaggy and the Gambino crew. Two more major happenings benefited DeMeo. Carlos Gambino, the boss of the Gambino family, died of natural causes, with Paul Castellano named as Gambino's successor. Anello Della Croce retained the position of underboss, while Gaggy became the capo regime, taking over Castellano's old crew. Gaggy moving up benefited DeMeo, and with Gambino's death, associates were now eligible to become newly made members of the family, becoming made men, as it was called. Although Paul Castellano didn't open the books right away for new members, he instead shuffled crews, promoting existing members before opening books to new members. It was also thought that Castellano opposed the idea of making DeMeo a made man due to DeMeo looking down on street-level members and involvement in white-collar crime. Plus, Castellano believed DeMeo to be an uncontrollable wild card. Gaggy kept the persistence of Castellano, but the answer was always no. By 1972, DeMeo, frustrated, decided to pursue even more ventures to turn profits in an attempt to make his boss believe in him by making his boss's pockets swell even more than they already were. The Hell's Kitchen Westie gang and Irish American gang were involved in causing delays to a convention center that Paul Castellano had money and time in, causing him much grief and frustration. Mickey Spillane, a leader of a Another Irish gang was also causing problems, but with his unsolved death, James Coonan assumed control of the Irish-American affairs on the west side of Manhattan. Enter DeMeo, who saw a very lucrative deal partnering with the Westies, and he persuaded Gaggy to pursue a partnership. Soon afterwards, Coonan and his second-in-command were called to a meeting with Castellano, and the Westies finally agreed to become a de facto arm of the family, claiming 10% of all profits while being given info on several lucrative union deals, and they were to take on murder contracts for the family. This was the persuading factor in Castellano allowing DeMeo to become a made man. DeMeo's dream, for as long as he can remember, was to become made, putting DeMeo in charge of all family Westie business, and DeMeo was ordered to stay away from narcotics, and he was ordered to get permission before murdering anyone. But DeMeo, as demented as he was, continued both things. In 1977, he committed a double murder on a suspected car thief turned squealer and his girl. Both bodies dumped where they could be found to be used as a warning to everyone thinking of crossing DeMeo and his crew. And then, in true DeMeo style, he started knocking off members of his own crew. Grillo was first, then his longtime man Rosenberg, who caused trouble with the Cuban drug cartel, where he killed one of their men in a deal gone bad. Then DeMeo messed up and performed his most public and uniformly stupid hit when a college student, Dominic Ragucci, who was a door-to-door salesman to pay his tuition, was killed by DeMeo, who assumed he was a Cuban assassin. DeMeo and two of his crew pursued him for several miles before killing him. This untimely public killing of the student had strained his relationship with his wife, and Nino Gaggy was absolutely infuriated by Ragucci's death, ordering DeMeo to knock off Rosenberg and to quit stalling and perform the hit as soon as possible. DeMeo had to perform the hit, but his body was not chopped up because the Cuban cartel wanted his death to make the newspapers. So Rosenberg's body was left in his car in Broad Channel to be found. This particular hit seemed to have upset DeMeo, for he stayed in his bedroom for 2 days. Then DeMeo eventually joined his cousin Guglielmo, hiding out in a safe house near 42nd Street in Times Square. He grew a full beard, donning a ball cap and sunglasses every time he was in public. DeMeo kept his businesses growing slowly but surely, though, amassing the largest car theft ring ever in the New York City area. All were included in the profit. By 1979, DeMeo's car theft ring, known as the Empire Boulevard operation, was in full swing, shipping hundreds of stolen vehicles to the Middle East. He had 5 active partners in the operation, each grossing $30,000 a week in profits. The operation was damn near exposed by a legitimate car dealer, though, but DeMeo and his crew whacked the said car dealer and the dealer's friend before the authorities could be informed. Also in 1979, DeMeo and Gaggy had business, so to speak, with 2 made men in Gaggy's crew, James Ippolito and James Ippolito Jr. They both met with Paul Castellano, accusing DeMeo and Gaggy of dealing drugs and being involved in porn. These accusations were true and could mean death, but Castellano leaned more towards Gaggy, who was a very loyal ally. So he gave Gaggy free rein to respond however he saw fit to the accusations. So he and DeMeo whacked Junior and Senior outside the Gemini Lounge, but a witness alerted a police officer who ended up in a shootout with Gaggy on the losing end, being arrested and left with a bullet wound in his neck for his trouble. DeMeo had split, so wasn't seen by the witness or arrested or tied in with the hit. Remarkably, Gaggy was able to beat the murder charge and the attempted murder charge on the officer due to jury tampering, and he only was given an assault charge with a 5 to 15 federal prison sentence. But DeMeo whacked the witness in 1980, thus sealing Gaggy's freedom. But by this time, the Empire Boulevard operation had expanded so much that its headquarters had caught the FBI's attention, and they raided it in 1981. And this saw Henry Borelli and Frederick Danone as the only two arrested, and DeMeo had informed them to take the charges so maybe the investigation on the Empire Boulevard operation would go away. Also, the FBI had become interested in all the murders and missing persons in and around the Gemini Lounge by 1982. One of DeMeo's longtime associates and car thieves, Vito Arena, had been arrested on a string of thefts, and he started singing to the feds and state task forces who were investigating the DeMeo crew. Arena told the cops all he knew about the DeMeo crew, how the Gemini method was performed, and he even gave up a victim's whereabouts. Joe Scorney was found in a barrel of concrete at a lake, as Arena had stated. So this ended up having Joe Wendling go to the Gemini Lounge to offer DeMeo a deal to turn state's evidence. But DeMeo counter-offered $1 million and said, "You're old-timers, why do you want to get involved in this?" And he totally refused turning evidence and said that he was a good soldier and would always be a good soldier. At this time, in 1982, DeMeo and his crew went into hiding, only to leave hiding to consult with lawyers, DeMeo fearing an indictment due to the Southern District of New York's investigation. Also, Paulie Castellano became worried since Arena knew the Gambino family chain of command and started about having DeMeo whacked due to Arena turning state's evidence on the Gambino crew. Also at this time, Gambino soldier Angelo Ruggiero didn't know at the time that he had been bugged, and the FBI picked up conversations between him and Gene Gotti, John Gotti's brother, talking about Castellano's hit being put out on DeMeo, but no one was willing to take it due to the army of killers DeMeo had, and as well as DeMeo's ruthless nature. Even John Gotti had hesitated taking the contract. Eventually, Frank DeCrico and his crew were given the job, but DeCrico ended up giving the job to DeMeo's own men, according to Sammy the Bull Gravano. The winter of 1982-83 saw DeMeo being paranoid, knowing his death was near, and always wore a leather jacket outside, which housed a sawed-off shotgun underneath. He wore this almost every time he left his mansion. January 10th, 1983, DeMeo met his crew at Patty Testa's house and never made it to his daughter's birthday party that night. On January 20th, 1983, in the Varuna Boat Club parking lot, DeMeo's caddy was found, and upon search by the NYPD, DeMeo's partially frozen body was found in the trunk. He suffered multiple gunshots to the head and one to his hand in probable self-defense. In 1984, a wiretap caught Ralph Scapo, a Colombo family soldier, talking about how DeMeo was whacked by his own family, knowing he couldn't beat the charges, and Paulie Castellano considered DeMeo wild and crazy with a set of iron balls and a wild card attitude. Then a Lucchese family underboss turned government witness Anthony Gaspipe Casso ended up having Center and Joseph Testa whack DeMeo since Gotti and DeCrico couldn't get close to him. And in an ironic twist of fate, DeMeo's death sealed Paulie Castellano's fate also. Gotti and DeCrico whacked Paulie on December 16, 1985. Something they would have never attempted if DeMeo and his crew was still alive and around. This led to John Gotti becoming boss of the Gambino crew. Frankie DeCrico became underboss, with Sammy the Bull Gravano becoming consigliere. But 4 months after Paulie was whacked, Frankie DeCrico was himself whacked by a car bomb, which the La Cosa Nostra in the U.S. considered taboo due to the collateral damage of innocents that could also be hurt or killed. This hit ignited Sammy the Bull Gravano's hatred of Chin Gigante and Gaspipe, who both were involved and knew about DeCrico's hit. But that's a story for another time. DeMeo was not just a mob hitman. He was a serial killer, someone who fantasized about killing people. Sammy Gravano's stories confirmed this. Once a mob hitman himself, he even stated that he thought DeMeo was off his rocker mentally and was very unstable. Over 200 deaths are associated with the DeMeo crew, not all confirmed. The number may never be known, but DeMeo's excitement for killing someone was sick and sadistic, using the Gemini method to dispose of someone, a twisted, serialistic nightmare that feels more like a serial killer's kicks rather than a hitman's contract hit. Though for many years DeMeo's Gemini method was very effective for making people disappear, but he really did enjoy it too much and performed it far too often, killing more than he should have for a business and family who made a living by the sword. But the Mafia family usually do not like having innocents and bystanders involved in their business, whether it be life or death. They only hit who they are supposed to. And DeMeo's method had become very bad for business due to its collateral damage and sheer amount of death it caused. This is Big Duke 6 with yet another story from the tales and the history of La Cosa Nostra here in the United States. Until next time.